Hi there, this is Phil with Phil Effects, and this is part 2 of my two-part series on cameras, setting up cameras and animating cameras. A little bit about this tutorial. This tutorial is certainly not the end-all to beat-all on camera animation. In fact, camera animation done correctly is an entire series of tutorials, because to animate cameras correctly is just as tricky and it's just as difficult and challenging as animating a character. There's a whole lot that goes behind the camera animation. What I'm wanting to do with this tutorial is just to give some exposure to some of the different types of cameras that are available in Maya, in particular the camera aim, and the camera aim and up, and to give a brief overview of some of the types of animations where you would use those kinds of cameras, and some examples of some quick camera animations that you can do in a scene. So I think this tutorial should be very helpful for somebody getting started. For somebody who's quite experienced, this probably is not going to be the right tutorial for you, but there could be a few things in here that you could pick up. So let's go ahead and get started. So when you create cameras in Maya, like I talked about before in the previous one, you go up to your Create menu, go to Cameras, and we pull this off, and we have three basic types here. I'm not talking about the stereo cameras, but we have a camera aim, and camera aim and up. So let me create some of those real quick. So here's our basic camera. When we have a camera and aim, we have a group that's created. So here's the camera that we created, and it's all by itself. When we have this group, we have the camera itself, and we actually have a locator of where the camera is aiming. If you are familiar with After Effects, in After Effects they actually call this a point of interest. And so if we take this whole group, and let me slide this a little bit out of the way, but the camera aim is, as you would expect, it's the locator that controls where the camera is pointing. And so if you fix this on a set location, it doesn't matter how you orient the camera itself within the 3D world, it will always point towards this aiming point. And if we create an aim and up, you have another camera group, and so here's the camera aim, and here's the camera up. And again, this is another locator, and it's tied to the rotation of the camera, and this fixes the orientation such that if you change this position, it changes the up position of the camera. So you can see if I drag this to this way, or I push it that way, you can see that the up orientation is always going to be pointed towards this up locator. Same thing with the aim. Where the camera is aiming is always going to be tied to that aim locator. So let's go ahead and get started, and I want to change my view here, because with the things that I'm going to be bringing in and the things that I want to do, I want a different kind of a view here. So let me real quick go in, and I'm going to delete these cameras that I created right now, and I want to create a 3-window view. So I have an outliner and a camera view on top, and then a whole camera view on the bottom. And the quickest way to do that is if we go over here and basically say we want 3 panes with a split top, which is what I want. So I have 3 panes with a split top. I have my outliner here, I have my perspective camera view here, and what I really want is another camera view here. But I want to go ahead and save this, so I'm just going to say let's put the perspective camera in both views, and then we'll go down here, and I'm going to, for a short time, I'm going to replace one of these views I have here. So if I go in here and we say save the current layout, I'm going to call this outliner cam and cam, and we call that, and so we have outline cam and cam. So I could go back and I could get this view, and then I could go back here and say I want my outliner cam and cam, and this comes back. So we have this 3-window view, and I want to bring in an object here that we want to be able to use a subject matter, and I've got this X-Wing fighter that I had from a previous project that I worked on, and let me delete just some of the things that I don't need. And so we've got this X-Wing fighter, and let's bring him in and set him in the middle, and I want to scale this down. And so we've got our my X-Wing fighter here. So this gives us something that we can look at. One of the first and easiest things to do with Maya is it has a built-in function called the turntable. And if we go up here and we go to the animate menu, let's tear this off so we can look at it. We've got this turntable right here, and let's go ahead and click on this and look at the options that we got. And what it's going to do is I can create a turntable that's either clockwise or it'll rotate counterclockwise, and I can tell the number of frames that I want for the turntable. So I've got 24 frames. Maybe let's make this a little bit longer. If I'm doing 24 frames a second, that's 1 second. So let's do 48. So it'll be 2 seconds, and it'll rotate in a clockwise direction. And the setup of this is such is it's going to create a second camera, and that second camera is going to have a view that I set up with this initial perspective camera. So in other words, if I'm looking at it this way, it's going to do a turntable and go around from this point of view. If I'm looking at it directly edge on, it'll do a turntable from this kind of view. Actually, what I want to do is something that looks kind of just like this, and maybe zoom in just a little bit. And so let's go ahead and create a turntable. Whoops, no, I have to tell it what I want. So I want to do a turntable around that object, and let's do a turntable. So that created a turntable, and now if I go in here and in my panels in perspective, I have this turntable camera. So now if I look at this, and the look is the same because remember I said it makes a copy of the perspective camera. And so down here I have this turntable camera. And one thing I want to show right off the bat here also is in my setup. In your setup right now, for my animation setup, I have got it set up so the update view is on all windows. Now normally Maya comes up and it's just the active window. So let's first look at what this does if we have just the active window open. So I'll save this, and if we hit an animate and we go around, there's our turntable. So we go all the way around. And because I said it stops at 48, there is no animation after that, but here we have this animation for 48. Okay? And if we go in here in Windows, and if we look in the animation editor and we look at the graph editor, and I select this group and I select the turntable camera, there we go. We can see that this does an animation across 48 frames. And across 48 frames, we get 360. Go over here. We get 360 degrees of rotation across 48 frames. So this is the animation that the turntable created. And I could go in and using the graph editor, I could change this. If you see right now the way that this goes, it starts out slow and then it speeds up and then it slows down. If that's not something you like, if we want to go in here and just play through 48, well, if we wanted to change that, I could select this graph, and instead of being a slope graph, I could make it linear. And so now, if we go back in and start this again, it's going to be very constant, which is actually what you tend to do if you want to do a turntable. You usually don't make it with a ramp up and a ramp down. Usually you're showing a client something, a model perhaps that you made. And so this is a quick way to get a quick 360 degree turntable animation of an object. And it's not like everything's locked in concrete. You can go back and you can change some positions, but this gives you a good start, and it's actually a very fast way for making a quick turntable. if we go in and I talked about this, so if we set this up for all windows and we hit save, now the perspective camera doesn't move, and at the moment the turntable camera is invisible. I'm going to show that, and if we move this fighter, so what do I have here? Perspective camera there. Alright, that's what I want. That's why I couldn't move it. So here's my perspective camera. Alright, so we're seeing the view through the perspective camera, and here's the animation of the turntable camera. So let me deselect that, and I went in and I selected update all views. So now if we play, you can see the camera. This is that turntable camera, and you can see the turntable camera going around, as well as seeing the view through the turntable camera on the bottom. If we went up here and I just said what's the active window, and let's save that, and I'll make this the active window, and you can tell it's active. In Maya this is actually kind of very subtle. You can see this white line on the top here, so the top is the active window. So if we play this through, you see the animation of the camera, but you don't see the turntable that's going on at the bottom. Go back to the beginning and I click this. This is now the active window. We play this through and you see the turntable on the bottom, but you don't see the camera animating on the top. For what we're going to be doing today with a lot of the exercises, I really want all of the active windows to be seen. So I'm going to set this up so we see everything, and we can see animation on both. If you've got a very heavy scene, obviously something with hundreds of thousands or millions of polygons, activating all the windows is really going to slow your machine down, which is why the default in Maya is to have that off. We've got very light scenes, and so this is something that we can do, and so for the demonstration purposes of what we want to do, this should work out fine. Alright, so that's the turntable, and like I said, it's a quick way of creating a quick animation, doing a turntable for something such as a product shot. I'm going to go in and we'll set this back to perspective, and actually I'm going to take this and delete it, but I'm going to leave my X-Wing fighter here. So the next thing you want to do in terms of animating a camera is just creating a simple camera. So we can go in here, and if I'm just going to create a simple camera, I can go in and create cameras and create camera there, or I can actually go in here and just click on this and on the rendering tab, and that'll create a camera for me real quick. And so we have this camera here. Let's call this shot cam 1. Alright, and if we go through here, we have the view through shot cam 1. We can see that we're looking through. And for a very simple camera animation, what you can do, it's not any different with animating a camera or with animating an object. You go in and you set keyframes, and the simplest way to do that is to go in and turn on auto keyframe. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So we'll turn auto keyframe on by clicking down here, and I want to animate this in translation and in rotation. And so the quickest way to do that is you go in and you do a set keyframes. You do a Shift W, that does the translates, and a Shift E does the rotation. So I set my keyframes right here on frame 1, and those are my first keys. So now what I want to do is we'll change the time, go out here 20 seconds, and what I might like to do is come in and maybe I'll zoom around just a little bit and come down like this, and that sets another set of keyframes. So here's my view coming in, and there are my second set of keyframes. So now let's go in and I'll go out to 40, and I'll zoom in here, and maybe I want to come around to the front. So go in and maybe I want the next shot to be like this. So now we've You can see there's a transition in there. Now this gets kind of bumpy, and this is one of the problems with just kind of doing a forward edit where you just move the camera and then set keyframes. Is things can get a little rocky here, but it definitely is a valid way to do it. So let's go out to 60, and I'll zoom around here. Maybe get underneath our fighter here. So now this is the third set. All right, let's go out to 80. I'll zoom up like this. Go out to 100. Zoom around here, and go out to 120, and I'll come back to the back. So there's our animation, and it's just a simple camera. You can see that I got quite a bit of gyrations here, both in rotation and position. But you know, it's a valid animation, and it might work for the scene, it might not work, but this is the very first kind where you just set up the camera by itself. Now typically, almost never in fact, do I go in and just animate a camera. One of the first things I usually do is I set up a very simple rig, and so let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to take and delete this, and to create a simple rig, the first thing I would do is I create a locator. So when you create a locator, what that does, if you're using After Effects, they use they call that a null, and I'll probably slip in this tutorial and call that a null a couple of times, but a null or a locator is an independent object, so you can animate this and then you can animate the camera independent of that. Where this really comes into play is if you want to animate a camera along a path, and this is where it becomes quite powerful. Okay, so for the first thing I want to do is show how you edit just a single camera and put that on a motion path, and Maya actually has a very simple way of doing that. And so I've got my setup here, and I want to create a motion path for the camera that I'm going to create, and there's a simple way to do that. I'm just going to create a NURBS curve, and for this one I'm going to create just an arc. So I go into my arc tools, and I'm going to create a 3-point arc circle, and click here and click here and click here, and boom, there's our circle. Hit return, and now I've got an arc circle, and I want to put this somewhat close in the center. Let me pull this back just a little bit. It doesn't have to be exact for what I'm doing. And then we'll go back in here, and then the next thing you want to do when you animate a camera, especially if you're animating on a curve, like I said before, I like to create a rig. And a simple rig with a simple camera means that you don't have the camera tied to you don't keyframe the camera itself. You essentially keyframe a locator, and the locator takes and it creates the basic motion for the camera, and then you make slight adjustments by setting keyframes to the camera itself. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to go in here, and we're going to go in here and create a locator, and I'm going to call that shot, locator shot cam 1. All right, and then we're going to create a camera, and I said I'm just going to create a simple camera, so I'm going to call this shot cam 1. All right, and to create an animation on a motion path, it's very simple. I'll go in, and first off, like I said, I want to parent the camera to the shot cam, so I'm just going to middle mouse drag and put that camera under this locator. So now the camera is parented to that locator, and the next thing I want to do is I want to animate the camera on a motion path. And to do that, it's very simple. I select the item that I want to put on the motion path. In this case, it's not the shot cam, it's the locator. So I take the locator and I select that. Then I control click the curve that I want to put that on, and we go up to the animate menu, and we go down here to motion paths. and I'm going to attach this to the motion path. And let's call up the things for that. A couple of things. One is the time range defaults to this time slider. So if you set the time slider for the length that you want, you don't have to change anything. If you haven't, then you want to go in here and you want to set a start and end. And you can set the start and end different from what the time slider is. Like in the case here, I've got a time slider that goes from 1 to 120 frames. Let's say I really wanted to animate this camera across 400 frames. So I could put in 1 in here, and I could put the 400 in here, and it would create an animation across 400 frames. Parametric length, that has to do with how fast your object will go across the curve that you're animating. I'm not going to show that with this one. I'm going to create a second curve, and we're going to demonstrate what parametric length does. But for everything else, I'm going to use the time slider for what I'm doing right now, and the rest of the defaults are fine. So I'm just going to go ahead and say attach, and lo and behold, look and see what it did for us. It went in and it moved the camera and that locator, and it put it on the path. And not only did it put it on the path, but you can see that as we go around, the camera, the locator essentially with that camera is following that path. All right. And so we have a view and we have an animation on that path with the camera. And here's where I want to go back in, and now I want to look through the shot cam. And so now we can see through the shot cam. So this is kind of like doing a partial turntable. Now the advantage of this is, for one, I don't have a complete turntable, and maybe you don't want that. And the other advantage is now I can go in and I can actually set some keyframes on that camera. So we can initially go in and I can take the camera and I can do, we have our auto key set on, and I can do a Shift W and Shift E. So we're going to keyframe translate and rotation, and I'm going to start off and I'm going to be underneath and I'm going to be looking up at that camera. I don't think I want to. Let's see here. Change how that looks. I want to look up just a little bit and then get further down. So initially I want to be right here. All right. And then we move to about right here midway, and at midway I want to come up, and here's where I want to be pretty much looking right on at our fighter. Okay, so I'll put that about in the middle. Maybe adjust the angle. All right, and then we'll go out to 120. And 120, I really want to be above looking down. So I'm going to pick my camera up, and let's go ahead and angle that down. So real quick, what I did was we now have an animation where you can see how the camera goes from a low point to a high point across there. The other thing that is also quite nice that we can now do with Maya, because I've set keyframes on that camera, I can go in and I can select the shot cam, and we go up to the animate menu, and I can create an editable motion trail for that camera. This is if you have Maya 2014 or 2015 and up, it will create a motion trail. So let's go ahead and do that. And now what you see is this is a motion trail of the camera itself. Okay, not the locator. The locator is on this path. This is the motion trail of the camera. So if I have this motion path up here, there's other things I can do with this. For starters, on the motion path for the camera, which you see in red, if I just right click on here, I can show frame numbers, so you can see frame numbers. There's frame number 1, frame number 60, frame 120. And if I want to, I can even go as far as just adding keys in here. So I can go in here and I can modify keys. And if I go in and I click on just this wave, you can see right there it added a keyframe right on 83. I can click on here and it put a keyframe here on 37. So by just right clicking, selecting modify keys, you can go in here and you can actually add keyframes to this, and I can take that keyframe, and if I wanted to, I can pull this up, and I can grab this keyframe and I can pull this down. I'm going to have something pretty crazy here, but we can see the camera is now following that path that I created by just doing those simple keyframes. You can also see in this case, if you've got a waveform that's like that, this is the case where you might want to use that camera and aim, which is what I'm going to show next. Because right now the camera goes way off and we're not looking at the X-Wing fighter. Alright, so let's go ahead and show how we would use this with a camera and aim. Delete these. And the other thing I want to do is I wanted to demonstrate to you that one feature on the progressive animation with the key path and what happens there. So let's create a path, and I'm going to create the wrong kind of path, but I'm going to show it for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to create a curve over here, and I'm going to get a CV curve. And for the first part of the curve, I'm going to put in a whole bunch of points, which is absolutely the wrong way to make a curve, but I'm doing it to demonstrate a point. And so we get a whole bunch of points put in for the first half of the curve, and then I'm going to spread these points out. Alright, so I have a terrible animation curve, but for demonstration purposes, it'll do what I want. And let's actually go in here and edit this just a little bit so we can clean things up. Let me pause while I edit. Okay, I'm back. I cleaned up my terrible path here, and we can see it's a little bit cleaner, but you get the gist of it, that there's a lot of points in the first half and not too many points on the second half. So what we want to do is we want to go in and we want to create that locator, and I'll call this locator shot cam 2, and this time I want to create a camera and aim. So we're going to create a camera and aim. Alright, and I'm going to call this shot cam 2, and call this shot cam 2 aim. Alright, and this camera we want to put on the motion path, which is this curve 1, and we want the camera to be parented to the locator. So I'm going to create a parent-child relationship between this locator. I'm going to make a simple rig for this locator and the shot cam. So I'm going to take the shot cam and drag this up, and we're going to put this under the locator. So there's my shot cam, and then remember I want to parent this to the curve, so I take the locator and then I control click the curve, and I go over here, and now we go to animate, and we're going to do a motion path attached to motion path. And now here's where I want to show this parametric length and show how things change with the parametric length. Let's first apply this without, and I can go into the attribute editor and I can modify this. So let's go ahead and just do an attach. Alright, and remember we have this shot cam aim, and the camera will always be aiming at that, so I'm going to put that right there. And here's our perspective. Let's look at shot cam 2, and you can see as I modify that aim, that's where the camera is aiming at. Okay, so let's look up here, and we go to the very beginning, And as we walk through this animation, as we go through this animation on this motion path, you can see the speed at which the camera goes through that path is about equal all over. Okay, and so it's going through, and for the front half and to the back half, it's about the same. If we go in and the attribute editor and I look at motion path, what I want to do is now I want to change this so we vary this by parametric length. Alright, so I'm going to click this parametric length, and now we go back to the beginning and watch the speed at which the camera goes through. Okay, the speed of the camera is going very slow in the beginning, and it jumps very fast at the end. Did you see that? Alright, very slow in the beginning, and it jumps in the very end. Okay, the reason it's doing that is, let's go up here and look at the control vertexes. You see that there are a lot of control vertexes in the front half. So by checking that parametric length, what's going on is the speed of the animation changes because there's a lot of points close together, and it takes those essentially as keyframes, and then there's a lot fewer points on the second half. And so it's varying the speed at which it goes through that motion path by the number of control vertices that were put in that curve. And so by putting in a lot of control vertices in the front half, the speed at which we follow that motion path is very slow in the beginning, and then it's very fast at the end. So that's what this does. Let's go ahead and click that off again, and now we can see it follows the progression. And here what it's doing is it's just taking the number of frames, in which case I have 120, and it's taking the total length of this curve, and it just divides the curve into an equal number of divisions in length of the curve, and it sets a keyframe for each one of those, and it evenly divides the speed at which the camera goes according to that. Because we have this aim now, this is where I can go in and we can have do some interesting things with these control vertices. And like before, where I moved I can go in and we can essentially set up just like I did before. I can go into my shot cam. Let's go back to the beginning and look at the channel box, and the rotation is controlled somewhat because of the aiming on here, but I can go into the shot cam and I can keyframe this in E. Excuse me, auto key this, the shot cam. And I can key select it. Alright, so we can keyframe the camera in E, and I can go up right now. Alright, and we can go out to frame 60, and I can bring that down, kind of be underneath it. And notice that the camera is always still pointing at the at our X-Wing fighter. So I went in, let me turn that keyframe off, go back, and because we're using that aiming function, I have gone in and I've modified the camera in terms of how it's going across, but it's always still pointing at our fighter. The other thing that I can do is, just like I did before, is we can go in, and because I have keyframed that camera, we can go into animate and I can create an editable motion trail, and it does that. So like before, now that I've keyframed the camera, I have an editable motion trail that I can go in and I can set keyframes along this. We can go in here and modify keys, show frame numbers, and I can add some additional keys in here, and I can go in and I can pull things down. I can pull things up so I can modify this path. Get kind of crazy with it. But because we have actually an aim on the camera, we can go through here, and the camera is still always pointing at the X-Wing fighter. So this is what the camera aim does for us, all right? It allows us to go through and do this, and regardless of what kind of gyrations I put on that path, it's always still going to be pointing at my my fighter. So this is the advantage of having that aim function. Let's go ahead and get rid of all of this. And then the last thing I want to demonstrate essentially is the aim and up. The aim and up is very similar to the aim. It's just that what, let's go in and we'll create a locator again because I want to make a rig. And name this to locate shot cam 3. Let's create ourselves a camera. This time we'll do a camera aiming up. And now we have this aim and we have this up thing. The same kind of thing I want to do before. I want the camera. I'm going to create a rig, so I'm going to parent that to the locator for my shot cam. All right. And now I have this aim and up that control how the camera up and where it's pointing at is keyframe, so it's always locked on that. So now we can go in and take that locator, control click the curve, go in here and go to animate, and we can go to motion path and we can attach to the motion path. And I'm just going to take the default. I'm going to leave parametric length off, and so let's just attach that and apply it. So we go back to the beginning and let's look through our camera 1. Now here we see some strangeness going on relative to where we have the aim and the up located. So what we need to do is we want to take up, and in this case we really want to bring that very high. So we straighten that up. Let's see what happened when I pulled that up vector way up. It straightened up the camera. All right. And take our aim and we can move that and put it back in line with where we're looking at it. So the up vector holds the camera up across that path, and the aim again keeps it locked on. So we can go around, do this whole thing again. Alright, let's go back. Okay, now like I did in the last time, I want to go in and if we want to just add some special keyframes just for the camera, because we want to adjust it just a little bit, I can do that. Let's go in and we'll turn auto keyframe on. It's key selected, so we've got keyframes on 1, and I can take and let's zoom in on that shot cam so we can see it. Hit the W key, and I'm going to pull that up just a little bit, and I don't need to worry about rotation because it's locked on the camera. It's locked on the X-Wing fighter the whole time. So then we go out here to 60. Actually, let's do some fairly crazy things with this. So we'll go to 30 and I'll go way down underneath it. And we'll pull in and we'll zoom in. All right. Whoa. I want to pull and zoom in. What happened there was the thing called a gimbal lock. All right, the camera flipped on me. So we zoom in real quick, and then we'll come out to 60, and I'm going to zoom that back out, And we're going to come way up above. And then we go here to 90. And I'm going to go over here, come down, bring the camera in. All right. I'm making a fairly ridiculous animation here. That's obvious, okay? I'm not sure why you would do this, but I'm trying to show the point of having that up vector as well as the aim vector simplifies at least pointing the camera if you're going around a fairly ridiculous path. All right, so we're done there. Let's click this off. Let's go back to the beginning, and we'll do our crazy camera animation. And the whole time through this wild movement, the camera has been locked onto the object that we're interested in. So same kind of thing, we can go up here to animate, and I can create an editable motion trail, and it does that. And we can see, in fact, that this is quite a ridiculous animation trail. All right. I wasn't even expecting that. Looks like I made a loop with the camera. Yeah, I did. Okay. So we've got quite a ridiculous path here for an animation, but I think you can see the advantage of having that up. You wouldn't use the up a lot. I think, you know, you get into real people that you know, animate cameras for a living, it's probably not something that they use a lot. Most of the time they like to have a lot of control over the camera, and there is just a basic rig that they'll go with, which is a camera, and it'll be tied to a locator. And very often they'll probably use maybe a motion path, and you want to lock it. Maybe you've got a fighter or something that you got going through a scene, and so you want to be able to follow that, and so they'll lock that on that path, and they'll follow the object going through the animation through that path. And there's numerous ways that you can do that using point constraints and some other things. But this at least gives an overview. You can see how this can be animated, and you can see the advantages of having both the up control and the aiming control on there. So this has been Phil with Phil Effects. Hopefully this will help you out, at least getting started with your camera animations, and we'll catch you on the next video.